tackling Uyghur forced labor in the UK solar industry. My name is Mia, and I'm the Executive Director of Renee Kassan. For those of you who are new to Renee Kassan, the Jewish Voice for Human Rights in the UK, works to promote and protect universal rights, drawing on Jewish values and Jewish experience. We work within the Jewish community in the UK by building support for human rights values amongst British Jews, and in the wider community by bringing the authority of Jewish perspective on issues that resonate with Jewish experience. Since Renee Kassan first started working on the Uyghur issue back in 2019, we have successfully spearheaded the UK's Jewish community into being the leading faith community speaking up for and standing in solidarity with Uyghurs, from challenging the 2022 Winter Olympics to calling out companies like Volkswagen, Shein, and many others that are complicit with the persecution of Uyghurs in the Uyghur region of northwest China. This has been achieved by organizing events just like this one, delivering calls for action, regularly raising the issue in the media, Jewish media and wider press and other platforms, engaging the community's spiritual and communal leadership, our youth and future leaders, and most importantly, by engaging the ordinary members of our community who want to show their support on this issue. We are all well aware that successfully addressing the immediate dangers of climate change requires a rapid transition from fossil fuels and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Solar panels and electric vehicles, to name a few, have a crucial role in this urgent transition. 95% of the world's solar panels rely on the primary material polysilicon. Over 45% of the global supply of this component is manufactured in the Uyghur region. The Helena Kennedy for International Justice found that all polysilicon manufacturers in the Uyghur region have participated in forced labor transfer programs and or are supplied by raw materials manufacturers than have. Chinese state-facilitated forced labor programs are so deeply ingrained in the Uyghur region that experts recommend working under the presumption of risk of forced Uyghur labor in any workplace located within the region. Several steps have already been taken to address the wider issue of Uyghur forced labor. In 2021, the US introduced the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act as a strategy to prevent the import of goods made with forced labor from Uyghur region and issue guidance for importers. Similar steps have been taken on a European level. And here in the UK, as the newly elected Labour government forges ahead with an ambitious new clean energy plan, the challenge we have is how do we use this expansion of solar industry as leverage to call on UK government to challenge and clean up supply chains tainted with Uyghur forced labor. And to help us do that, I'm delighted to introduce our two speakers for this evening, who will give us an overview of what is happening to the Uyghurs in the Uyghur region and across China, and what are the challenges and opportunities to ensure both the global as well as the UK solar industries apply the necessary due diligence on companies being considered for solar tenders. Our first speaker will be Rahima Mahmoud, who you've seen many, many times on a Renee Kassan platform. Rahima is an Uyghur human rights activist, interpreter, translator, and singer. She became executive director of Stop Uyghur Genocide in 2020, after spending years building a cross-community coalition pushing for greater action on the ongoing persecution and genocide of her people. Rahima has extensive experience advocating for the community. As a translator, she has worked closely with survivors, bringing breaking news reports and interpreted witness testimonies during the Uyghur Tribunal in 2021. She has played a key role in galvanizing UK civil society against the atrocities in China. and is also currently the director of the World Uyghur Congress UK. Our second speaker is Louisa Grieve. Louisa is the director of global advocacy for the Uyghur Human Rights Project, where she's responsible for shaping strategies to end complicity and increase leverage to end human rights crimes against the Uyghurs and to assist victims and secondary survivors. She focuses on government policy and sanctions enforcement, corporate accountability, and ethics standard setting by professional and industry bodies. She also leads the coalition building to mobilize civil society support around the world. And together with Stop Uyghur Genocide and Uyghur Human Rights Project, Reneka-san is one of many member organizations of the Coalition to End Uyghur Forced Labour. So Rahima and Louisa will each speak for about 15 minutes each, after which we will open the conversation up to questions from you using the Q&A function. And finally, just as I'm sure you have noticed, this event is being recorded. So Louisa, with all due, without further ado, the mic is yours.
Is it for me?
Sorry, Rahima, yes.
Okay, Mia. Thank you. And first of all, thanks, Mia, for organizing this event, for Reneka-san consistently supporting and helping to raise awareness about the Uyghur situation. And yes, I have been, speaking about the situation for many years now. And today I will just focus more about the current situation, what is happening at the moment, because a lot of people, due to being sidelined with many other atrocities and not up to date with the situation. So over the past several years, the Chinese government has waged a brutal campaign against the Uyghur people, a campaign that has dismantled our culture, erased our heritage, and systematically sought to destroy our identity. The unprecedented crackdown on the Uyghurs began in 2017 under the guise of anti-terrorism. But what has unfolded is nothing less than a genocidal project. The CCP has created a nightmarish reality for Uyghurs, characterized by mass surveillance, arbitrary detentions, and forced labor. Up to 3 million Uyghurs have been herded into so-called re-education camps, places where language, religion, and culture are stripped away, and where survival often depends on total submission. Those fortunate enough to graduate from these camps are channeled into forced labor industries. In this way, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, has engineered a system designed to break the Uyghur people physically, culturally, and spiritually. But now, after tightening its grip on the Uyghur region, the Chinese government has shifted tactics. It is promoting both domestic and international tourism in the so-called Xinjiang tourism, using this to sell a fabricated narrative of peace and prosperity. In 2022 alone, Chinese state media claimed over 265 million tourist visits to the region. These tourists, both from China and abroad, are shown bustling shopping streets, fake cultural performances, and artificial glimpses of normality. The CCP has curated a sanitized version of the life in the Uyghur homeland, hiding the horrors of mass incarceration, forced labor, and cultural annihilation from the eyes of the outsiders. This is genocidal tourism, an attempt to whitewash crimes against humanity. Visitors do not see the hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs languishing in prison, the Uyghur children torn from their families and placed in Chinese boarding schools, where their language and culture are forbidden. They do not see the historic mosques and sacred sites that have been bulldozed to wipe out any trace of Uyghur identity. And they certainly do not see the suffering of Uyghur women subjected to forced sterilizations or Uyghur men sentenced to decades in prison on fabricated charges. Instead, they see an illusion, carefully crafted propaganda meant to convince the world that all is well in the so-called Xinjiang, the East Turkestan. The CCP's goal is clear: to recruit these tourists into supporters, to have them see for themselves that the region is supposedly safe and thriving, but what they see is a lie. The reality is that Uyghur culture has been decapitated. Our intellectuals, our artists, our leaders have disappeared into the shadows of the Chinese prison system. Our people are forced into labor camps, turning them into factory workers who produce goods for global markets. These goods, made through the suffering of Uyghurs, continue to infiltrate supply chains around the world, despite international condemnation. The CCP's cover-up is masterful. They control the narrative through propaganda, manipulating media coverage and concealing the true extent of the atrocities. News reports are delayed, footage is censored, and the leaks are rare. Without images of suffering, the world media largely remains silent. The CCP knows this, and it continues to push its version of the truth to foreign audiences and its own citizens alike. The situation in East Turkestan today bears an eerie resemblance to other dark chapters in human history. Just as Nazi Germany resettled conquered lands and claimed the homes of those they imprisoned and killed, the CCP encourages Han Chinese settlers to take over Uyghur homes left empty by detentions. The settler colonial nature of this process is stark. Han settlers are not only given land, but also offered Uyghur women for marriage. Another ridiculous example of how the CCP seeks to erase the Uyghur people. So that is the reality, and this is what the Uyghur situation at the moment. Our work now is, apart from our campaign, also to fight the disinformation campaign by the CCP. So I will stop here, and I'll hand over to Louisa, and happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Rahima.
I'd like
Louisa.
to start. Thank you so much, Mia. I'm very, very grateful to Renee Kassan for many years of outspoken advocacy and solidarity with the Uyghurs in diaspora who are raising their voices. And my friend Rahima is an exemplar, tirelessly working despite tremendous pain and suffering, and using all her skills and talents on behalf of her people. My admiration. My job here is to talk about policy issues related to the solar industry. Just want to give an image here of Rahima's homeland, and just give me a minute because I didn't mean to say, you know the name Xinjiang. This is the Chinese government, but for when you're talking with Uyghur people, they prefer to say, let's say Uyghur region, the homeland of East Turkestan. And to be clear, why do we say, Mia said, so many global supply chains are implicated? It is state policy to have forced labor. Forced labor occurs in many places in the world. Corrupt companies in collusion with corrupt governments allow illegal coercion of labor. But in Rahima's homeland, in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, it is state policy since 2021 that all so-called minority adults of working age must be in a government-assigned place of work. As Rahima said, to refuse is to be subject to tremendous punishment. So what this means is the entire working age population is subject to a policy saying the government can send you to any job they want. And you know, it started with this camps where they called it Transformation Through Education Training Center. This is from 2018 from the New York Times. It openly says concentrated center. And this will have an echo of concentration camps we've heard of ever in other dark periods. And the state media openly showed, these trainees, so-called, are making shoes in a vocational education and training center. Well, starting in 2020 and 2021, we started having research on the links to our supply chains, to our consumer markets, to our industrial needs. And here we have the tremendous report from the UK, Sheffield Hallam University, in broad daylight, Uyghur forced labor and global supply chains. 95% of solar modules rely on this solar grade polysilicon, which Mia mentioned. This figure, 45%, comes from Rahima's homeland, the land of the genocide. And in fact, if you look at the company names that are in charge of polysilicon, you can find their own websites, their own company policy statements showing that they are participating in the government's forced labor program. This research from several years ago, 11 solar companies, 4 additional companies that are co-located within industrial parks that have accepted the Uyghurs forced to move away from home and work. And this research identified 90 companies, both Chinese and international. So in the US, you know, all around the world, Mia has mentioned this coalition to end forced labor. Everywhere in the world, advocacy for a policy response. Here's the US advocacy to young people living in the Northern Virginia area, asking for the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act to be passed. It is still the only law currently being implemented to police supply chains. So it started being enforced in June 2022. There's actually very good transparency on the part of the US Customs Agency. It's usually updated every month. I checked earlier today, and this has only been updated as of September, and we'll have to get in touch with them and say, why don't you have your October update? But it's so far $3.5 billion worth of shipments into the US have already been stopped for further inspection. About half were denied because the companies could not show that they knew what was in their supply chain. That is, it is from companies that are clearly not involved in forced labor in cooperation with the genocidal government. If you look at the type of products, the number one is electronics, right, with nearly 5,000 of these shipments. Of course, we know about footwear with cotton, and then agricultural products, pharmaceuticals. Just this week, a big report came out about the pharmaceutical industry, hundreds of companies involved in shipping pharmaceuticals around the world. And so I expect that pharmaceuticals will be a bigger portion in the future. But why do I highlight electronics? This category actually means both what you might think of as consumer products and solar panels. It is by far the largest. And it's not just imports from China. If you look at what the US government has published as what they have in real life, where are these supply chains for solar and other products coming from? China is only number 4. I think you can see on the screen that Malaysia, Vietnam, and Thailand account for much more. Why? Maybe some of it may probably some textiles, some finished goods, but most of it is because Chinese-owned solar companies were already moving their production to Southeast Asia, but still sourcing their polysilicon. And this is why you have the US government so concerned about solar panels, where the raw materials are coming from Xinjiang or the Uyghur region, even if the manufacturing company is another country. So even after this US law was passed, surely requiring every solar and clean energy company to really examine its supply chain. Nonetheless, a year later, just about a year ago, August 2023, Sheffield Hallam published with a new report assessing exposure by global companies to the forced labor happening in Rahima's homeland. So one change has happened that, in fact, other places are now accounting for a little bit more of the world's polysilicon. In the end of 2023, it's down to 35%. That is still a huge proportion because of the drive for clean energy. We need a greater supply, and yet over a third of it is still from this genocidal region. The vast majority of modules continue to have exposure. And in fact, some companies, knowing that the US is enforcing this law, have decided to have 2 product lines. We'll have clean product lines that don't source from the Uyghur region to make sure it's legal to import these products into the US. But then other countries may get dirty clean energy products. And I want to say one word about clean energy. It's not only solar. Again, Sheffield Hallam wrote a report about automotive supply chains with a big focus on EV. So China is rapidly expanding electric vehicle supply chains. That would be the lithium for the batteries, as well as other core minerals. And here, I just want to give this quote from Kendall Salcido from Nomogaya, which co-wrote, has also looked at this research. We knew there was forced labor built into the whole program, but we didn't know it would touch on so many commodities and parts. We hadn't actually understood how horrific the spread of forced labor was in the automotive supply chain. So now, what is the policy response? Now, as of July, the EU has a corporate sustainability due diligence directive for the first time. So it is a significant advance. It only applies to large companies, unfortunately, but it does require due diligence. So they do know what is in their supply chain, and they have to address human rights abuses as well as environmental harm in their value chains. So what can we do? Companies have to be under pressure. So whether you're a shareholder, I'm sure, whether you are working for a local government or a company that has a pension fund, where is that money invested? Where is your own savings invested in the stock market? We need to be asking, investors need to be asking, are the companies applying a single global standards, or are they trying to obey the US law for the US market and then still continue to use components that come from this horrific zone of state-imposed forced labor, and including cases where a company sells to the US. If a shipment is denied by US Customs, are they then re-exporting those goods somewhere else? This does not meet basic ethics standards. So the idea is we have to call on all companies to completely exit any supply chains with the Uyghur region. And Stop Uyghur Genocide did issue a report looking on exactly how would you source solar energy without Uyghur forced labor. This report came out 2 years ago. And a big focus is governments. So I want to mention for the UK government, the purchasing power of councils with so-called public sector procurement. This is actually almost 1/5 of Britain's gross domestic product. This is the place where questions being asked by members of René Cassin, other prominent advocates, can really make a difference. This is a mammoth amount of money, and it can be leveraged. The report says there must be ethical procurement, right? So councils must know, while they're doing the ethical thing for the planet, for our health, for pollution, for clean energy, by trying to move to solar and wind, that's not the end of the story. You have to look at the sourcing of your products. And let me give just an example from 2 weeks ago, in September 2024. In fact, the BBC reported that the South Kesteven District Council had been contracted to put in solar panels using the company called GeoGreen UK. However, evidence emerged that the panels were being supplied by a manufacturer called Canadian Solar. It is a Canadian company, but it's actually has a strong Chinese ownership, and it has been identified in the past as using products from the Uyghur Forced Labour. And there's more projects. This is the Mallard Pass Solar Farm, which is said to be the largest one in the UK, near Stamford and Rutland, also operated by Canadian Solar. So these are the questions need to be asked. Who is supplying the solar power? And then finally, at the national level, I believe just on October 8th, the UK Parliament was scheduled to have a debate on creation of the new Great British Energy. This is to be part of the goal to make Britain a clean energy superpower. Absolutely sounds great. It will be publicly owned. It will manage clean power projects. And the question is, this is taxpayer dollars. It is a huge amount of money. Will it be tainted by Uyghur forced labor? We always urge people to speak up as citizens to their local council and to their members of parliament. Can we make sure that our UK government money is not spent while building solar power, but doing it in a way that condones and is complicit with the horrific forced labor happening in Rahima's homeland? Thank you.
Thank you, Louisa, and thank you, Rahima. You know, I mentioned that René Cassin has been doing this since 2019, and it seems like we're stuck in this cyclical situation where we raise a concern and we bring it to the attention of governments and companies, the wider public, and if it's not apparel, then it becomes electric vehicles, and if it's not electric vehicles, it becomes sports events, and it's just the frustration there that nothing is happening, but actually a lot can happen. And just having the information shared and the work that both Stop Uyghur Genocide does and the Uyghur Human Rights Project, just facilitating that transfer of information is really really critical. And René Cassin is always happy to play its part in just bringing it to the Jewish community here. I'm going to open it up for questions. So if anyone has a question, if you could choose the Q&A function, just type it. If it's directed specifically at Rahima or Louisa, then let us know. And otherwise, I think you'll both have a go. So maybe as people think, I'm going to throw a question out there for you, Rahima. We're 100 days, I think, into a new Labour government. And there's obviously the big challenge around the big green energy project. But what other challenges should be put before this new government in its approach to China? And specifically in terms of the Uyghur issue, from the genocide to the atrocities that are happening in the camps, and obviously forced labor.
Thanks, Mia. Well, you know, both both from the work of World Uyghur Congress and Stop Uyghur Genocide. Number one, we ask the government to recognize what is happening to the Uyghurs it is a genocide, and that will bring the UK in line with the United States. And for example, United Nations have branded China as China's actions as potential crimes against humanity, and the evidence is very clear, from the Independent Uyghur Tribunal, and there is so many, evidence, but the government cannot really say that we don't know. So that has been a battle, really a battle. The Labour you mentioned, when they were in shadow position, it called it genocide. We know, including David Lammy, and also were very strong in words calling we have to tackle the forced labor and tougher legislations to prevent any Uyghur forced labor goods enter this country. Very disappointing so far. For 100 days, we didn't really see that very clear kind of even verbal condemnation or calling it as genocide. And we know the solar panel, we mentioned about the Melon Pass solar project. We know from the report, this is, the Canadian solar force, the forced labor in supply chains. And the report also concluded that this was not however, they basically gave the green light that is approved even after we have provided quite a lot of evidence about this. So this is a situation, and but I think we have the opportunity, even though it looks like not so positive, but I do believe we really need have this kind of big movement, need a huge support from across community, from across party. And that means just Stop Uyghur Genocide work, Reneke work on Uyghur issue, and World Uyghur Congress work is still very kind of uphill battle. So we have to just keep pushing, keep providing evidence. And there is, for example, a really good opportunity. For example, the Sarah Champion's amendment last week to the Great British Energy Bill, and this amendment will make one of the objects of the Great British Energy to uphold the human rights and the principles of, call it, just transition in energy supply chain. And so we need MPs to support. We have cross-party support, but we need a lot more MPs to support this bill. So if people are interested in, helping, we can help you to send you, provide you with a briefing so you can contact your MP so they can support this bill.
Thank you, Rahima. We've got a few questions coming in. And I think the first couple actually are UK specific, and hoping, Rahima, you can help with that. So what steps is the UK government taking to ensure that solar energy products imported into the UK are free from Uyghur forced labour? And I guess linked to that, are there any procedures in place? We don't have the US version of the Uyghur Forced Labour Act. But what do we have currently in the UK?
In the UK, the due diligence check basically is not really following all the procedures that's supposed to follow. And we are working with End Uyghur Forced Labour, coalition, briefing the government, reaching out to the councils. And Louisa mentioned about the policy that we produced 2 years ago with Unison, Sheffield Hallam University. It's all there. But from the way how they approved the Milad Pass, a solar project, and many other to follow, the government really not following what we really hoped. So at the moment, I cannot, there is no words for me to praise the new government doing anything right. And therefore, we need to have these bills to pass. And also we need a really grassroots support of our campaign. So we make sure that, this is a list that the government can do. There are alternatives. We know it is difficult to completely avoid and find a very clean supply chain, but there are alternatives. And, if they really want to, to make that commitment, then they can. But at the moment, from this one example of a Milad Pass project, the solar project, is very disappointing decision.
And I'll just briefly add to that at the moment, I mean, the only robust mechanism the UK has, and it's flawed, to address forced labour more broadly and trafficking and modern day slavery is the Modern Slavery Act from 2015. And I know that both Stop Uyghur Genocide and Renee Kassan, we made submissions on a recent consultation to strengthen some of the due diligence that exists, but also what's lacking in the Modern Slavery Act, and through that address also the issue of Uyghur forced labor. But of course, that is a more it's a broader approach to how the UK responds to a modern day slavery more broadly, and doesn't necessarily target specifically the issue of whether it's the solar industry or the green industry more broadly, and Uyghur forced labor. Louisa, maybe this is a question from you, from Rabbi Hilton, who's actually been an advocate of the Uyghur issue, I think from the first time Renee Kassan raised this in an event in 2019. In the term concentrated transformation used by China, is the similarity to concentration camp a coincidence? An accident of translation, or is there something behind that use?
Thank you. It's an excellent question. I have not seen an analysis from linguists and specialists in Chinese government policy. I would invite Rahima to also speak up if she has a view on this. It's GT, and you can see it as, even without that word, the policy is clearly very comprehensive. The directives to the Chinese government, local officials, provincial level, so-called, and local, coming from the very top, from Xi Jinping, chairman of the Communist Party and so-called president of the country, unelected, of course, is we must bear down, go to every corner, no place must be left uninspected. We have to treat the threat of Uyghurs, so-called extremism, or danger to the Chinese state as if it's a weed. And you can't just put a weed killer on a few. You have to spray it widely. So then when the government said, we're going to be really rounding up, not the poets and artists and professors and authors and religious people who'd been subject to constant roundups and jail terms for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, but rather in 2017, as Rahima said, we're going to have a wide net but then we're going to concentrate people into camps. So there was definitely an intention to concentrate. As to whether there's an echo of the Nazi term, or the term has been used in some other countries as well, in Africa and other places, that I have not seen. But certainly the intent to concentrate ordinary people and lock them up, that intention was there.
Thank you. Rahima, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I agree completely. The Chinese word 集中营 is equivalent to the concentration camp. So you assemble people in one place, in a one communal place, and it's all with a very heavy security, prison-like. And from all the leaked documents that we've seen, 3 layers of security, no escape. We've seen and heard from drone footage to the survivor stories. So that really echoes of the past. So yeah, I don't think that is sometime when I read the Holocaust survivors memoirs, stories, and then when I compare that to the survivor stories, it just so similar in some way. It's really terrifying. Sometimes I even thought maybe they have studied, Xi Jinping studied this, about how to really control a people using this kind of brutal method of interning large number of people.
Thank you. There's an interesting question about, do we know how much Uyghur slaves, or those are in situations of forced labor, actually earn? And I think I don't know the intention of who asked the question. There's one part of the question, but I think just adding to that, modern day slavery, forced labor, is not just whether an individual gets paid or not, but actually the definition of a modern day slave is that they work for little or no pay. They're unable to walk away by choice, and they're under the direct or implied threat of violence. So there is the issue of being paid, but actually it's the circumstances and it's the situation. So if both of you actually could describe, there's a lot of testimony and evidence available about the conditions of Uyghurs, whether in the concentration camps in Uyghur region or mainland China, working for these companies.
This slave labor project, forced labor project, is not limited to the concentration camps or people being taken away. Anyone, even if you are a professor, if they decide to take you away, and they can, and then they put you in a factory for you to work in factory, making tomato jams or any other products. We've seen from TikTok a video footage of so many Uyghur, mainly young people, were taken under the so-called poverty elevative project. So basically, we because you are living in a very undesired places, there's very little job, so we will give you a job, and taking them away, and bring the Han Chinese settlers to settle in their land. And these numbers is very difficult to estimate, because there is no way anyone can go and to do any investigation. But we know there's almost every family, there are people being taken and to these places. Those even lucky ones who avoided being taken to the concentration camps or the re-education camps were taken to mainland China, and the reports on like fishing industry and all electronics and clothing factories, it's just so many, you name it. And when the CCP sent police to these people's homes, and you know, with a notice that say that you are assigned to work in, mainland China. And we heard there are women who had little children, young children. They had to leave them behind. And this is the reason being not only just to profit from this free labor, but the main reason behind this is to really separate the community, so the people lose that opportunity to speak the language, to carry on living like Uyghur, the way of Uyghur life. And that is another way that they are achieving their purpose. The purpose is completely remove your identity from you, so you become like a Han Chinese. So the forced labor program, people must remember, is not only the Chinese government wants to profit from the Uyghurs' free labor, but most importantly is to erase the identity and culture.
Louisa, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, and those who've attended. No, go ahead. Sorry, Louisa. So I'm just, probably you've heard me saying it many times before when we host Uyghur-related issues, but when Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin coined the phrase genocide way back during World War II already, he gave equal measure to the cultural destruction of a people and a group, which means their language, their practices, their tradition, their history, as to the physical destruction. So very much to follow up from what Brahim was saying now, the forced labor is just another tool. It's just another way to progress the cultural destruction of what and who the Uyghur people are, even if the numbers of the physical destruction are not there. That certainly shouldn't be the criteria. Interesting political question. Why doesn't the Green Party champion the Uyghur issue? Whether it's forced labor or now within the focus of green energy. Do you have any insights to that? I presume the intention is the Green Party in the UK.
I don't know. Maybe we should campaign. We should reach out to them. Whoever supports Green, come here and ask me to give you all information you need to tell your party members. There is very, very important campaign that you can support.
So you heard it here on the Reneka-san platform. Challenge has been put out to Green MPs, the Green Party, and everyone who is supportive of the Green Party. Make sure that the Uyghur issue and Uyghur forced labor is something that the party addresses. Yes, Louisa.
Can I just say, if for people who are looking for these follow-up actions, I did put in the webinar chat the report that came out from Stop Uyghur Genocide, Unison, and Sheffield Hallam, where you can have the questions to ask, right? You go away from the webinar, I want to ask the question, how do I put my question? And there are sample questions and sample standards that you want to be asking. What are you doing about this standard? If you feel you need that help, it's this link that I put in the chat. Can I also say, we had a question from the audience, how can an individual who wants to check, like if I wanted to put in solar panels, how can I check? I answered in the chat, but it meant that the question disappeared from your view, Mia. So I'm just going to say it. Where can we look for information to make sure we make good choices? Of course, the best thing would be if there's a government requirement so that all imports, whether it's the Modern Slavery Act, mentioned in the chat is also the Prison Labor Goods Act, which, you know, the Foreign Made Prison Good Act of 1897, or it's the rules for government procurement. When government money is going to be spent on bringing the green energy throughout the UK energy supply, it is up to the government to say we're going to have standards, and then the the companies have to show that these goods are legitimate. And then as an individual, I would suggest some of the reports. I'm going to put those in the webinar chat as well, again from Sheffield Hallam University.
And there's also a very, very practical tool. You'll find it on Reneke Sand's platforms, and we'll share it at the end of this webinar. Maybe less about solar energy, but say the apparel sector, where probably 1 in 5 garments today are tainted by Uyghur forced labor. There is a Google checker. So anytime you walk on the high street and you go into a shop, you can check whether that company has complied with the due diligence required, for example, and we'll share all of that. Do you think the UN can warrant an arrest warrant for those individuals complicit with the Uyghur genocide? That's a big question.
Yes, it should, right? There is a genocide convention. Every country has signed it. There's a positive requirement. And without, even though the Human Rights Council received a report from the High Commissioner for Human Rights, former president, finding, as Rahima said, possible crimes against humanity. That was as far as that report could go. There is political pressure from China and its diplomatic allies who apply tremendous pressure at the UN. It's not just that they're putting money into UK universities, doing deals, hoping that the City of London and the financial industry are looking to make profits with their trade and their deals with the Chinese market and to get investment from Chinese sources. It's really everywhere, and that includes the UN, unfortunately. At the same time, there are special rapporteurs, so we're getting into a very arcane area of UN action, where these are independent people who would be a professor or a head of a human rights institution. They're appointed as a special rapporteur on modern slavery, on rights of women and girls, on cultural rights. And these people have issued a huge series of reports. And I will say that my organization, UHRP, has compiled those reports. And again, there's at least getting on the record in our premier international body that is supposed to, that was of course formed in the wake of World War II to protect our fundamental rights. It's there, but it's a hard, hard slog.
There's also,
yeah, I just wanted to add little from, you know, my observation for the last at least 7 years. We know how hard, you know, we fought for the report to be released. And 2 years on, nothing really, you know, they didn't even issue or sanction one official, naming one official. And UN is, we always say, is like a broken system. It's not really serving the purpose that, you know, how it was established. And China has huge power within the UN. We couldn't even get the issue to be debated when you know, over 50 countries signed up to oppose debate the Uyghur issue within the UN. And this is a situation we are facing. It's, yeah, it's very depressing. Yeah.
There's also the issue of the two main mechanisms the UN has, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. The International Court of Justice, one state needs to file a complaint against another state, and then it's debated. However, China, it has veto power. So that becomes an unlikely avenue for China to be held accountable. And in the International Criminal Court, China is not a member, and therefore cannot, crimes that are committed within China cannot be dealt with. So there is some legal creativity involved in trying to bring into the ICC's remit individuals that have committed crimes against Uyghurs in countries that are signatory to the ICC, but it's a really complicated system. But also the practical platforms, tools, the accountability mechanisms, the ICJ and the ICC are, in this case, incapable of holding China and the Chinese government to account. Sheldon, who is a great advocate of both Stop Uyghur Genocide and Renee Kassan, what effect will the recent High Court ruling that the National Crime Agency, the UK's National Crime Agency, and HMRC must investigate and seize suspected products of Uyghur slave labor? Is there any impact? What impact could there be if the ruling is applied?
Okay, thank you, Sheldon, for bringing that. So just give a little bit of background. The World Uyghur Congress sued the HMRC Home Office and National Crimes Agency for not doing their due diligence in importing the cotton goods. And Global Legal Action Network represented the World Uyghur Congress. The case started in 2020, and we lost first High Court case. And in May this year, and the second court hearing, the judges agreed with us, with our lawyers. The second court was specifically on a National Crimes Agency, that our lawyers argued the goods that, the forced labor goods are criminal goods. So under that term, that the National Crimes Agency should investigate. And so if you are interested, you can read the, you can find the details of that. So now World Uyghur Congress, our lawyers and the National Crimes Agency, we've been exchanging emails. They are showing interest in learning about more, folks, especially current about current situation. And like many, legal kind of changes, it takes time. But first step is a great, powerful, and historic, and they call it historic. This is the first time that this kind of case was heard in the UK High Court, and we won the case. So we still have a long way to really go to have some implementation of the judgments, but there has been some positive progress. Progress is happening at the moment.
I'm very conscious of time, and I'm going to save the last question to the end. So before that, Brahima and Louisa, if there are any final words you want to add to just the wealth of knowledge you've already shared with us and our audience. Louisa.
Yes, what I'd like to do is, again, thank the audience for paying attention, and I'm going to spend my time putting links in the chat. I put them in the wrong place. So in a minute, you'll see chat if you open the chat. And I just would hope that people who are concerned, who have been so active already, will use some of these links to figure out their next steps.
Thank you.
So for
Rahima.
me, if people are not following Stop Uyghur Genocide and my accounts, social media accounts, please follow and support whichever way you can, and donate to Stop Uyghur Genocide. And we need your support. And if you would like to know more about our work and would like to get involved, you can email us at contact@stopuygurgenocide.co.uk. Thank you.
Thank you, Rahima. And Joe, I left your question to the end. So Joe left a question. What does Ed Miliband have to say about this? His mother was a Holocaust survivor. And that's a perfect segue actually to my concluding remarks. Ed Miliband should have everything to say about it. And I think it's about us, Renee Kassan, and our supporters challenging him because of that. And that is what Renee Kassan is doing now. And you will find this as our call to action. How do we address our MPs, our representatives, whether they have a historical connection to us or just because we want them to care? And how do we raise these issues? And I can guarantee that Ed Miliband is certainly high on the list for Renee Kassan and our advocacy work, really challenging our MPs, using what we can, which is our historical story. It's not even our peoplehood story. For many of us, it's a personal story, and that adds that missing piece that takes a letter that one step higher, because it is personal. Like Rahima said, reading the testimonies of Holocaust survivors from 80 years ago and reading testimonies of Uyghurs from the camps in East Turkestan today, they're similar. They're the same stories. So we have the responsibility. We also need to ask questions. We need to ask questions, like Louisa said, as individuals, before we procure something, before we make an investment in a pension fund. It is very much in our power to challenge by just asking those questions and asking our representatives, like I said, whether it's MPs or on a local level, our councils. How are our councils? They're in charge pretty much of our day-to-day energy, anything that they procure for our benefit, that is compliant with both the ethical and the moral standards that are at the core of what we stand for, and that's human dignity, human respect, and justice. I want to thank Louisa and Rahima again for taking the time. Louisa, I think it's meet day for you in the US. Rahima, it's a cold evening for you here in London, but really, I really appreciate you coming on board. We will share all the links that Louisa has shared in our follow-up email. And follow Renee Kassan. Anything you want to know about Uyghurs, the work that we have done, and the challenges and opportunities to make a difference, you will find on our website. So I'd like to wish everyone a thank you and a good evening.
Thank you.